Hello, I'm Dan Veroni, Chief Operating Officer for American Solutions in Washington, D.C. And we're pleased to share with you Newt Gingrich's discussion with Virginia's new Governor, Bob McDonnell. During the conversation, Governor McDonnell talks about many of the things that made his campaign successful, like being positive, staying focused, reaching out to minorities and young people, harnessing the power of the Internet, and much, much more. This is the first part of the Solutions Academy ongoing series about running for office. Learn more at americansolutions.com. In Washington, D.C. for American Solutions, I'm Dan Veroni. We hope you enjoy the conversation between Newt Gingrich and Virginia's new Governor, Bob McDonnell.
Well, listen, I can't tell you, being at this stage in life now, the privilege of being the Governor of Virginia, and flattered that Newt, with all you've done to promote the conservative cause over the last 20-plus years, that you'd have me on the show. I mean, the remarkable things that you did back in '94 and beyond were exceptional. And now that I get the privilege of be interviewed by you for something that I can do now is great. I remember listening to those Go Pack takes in the mid-'90s as a kid, and listening to some of your ideas and the interviews you did with any number of people, and thought, that influenced my thinking back then. And now to think that I could contribute something with you to help other people is, it's an honor for me.
First of all, I just want to ask you an overall view. If somebody said to you, because you had such a remarkable race, great job, and ended up carrying Fairfax County, for example, for the first time in a long time, what would you say in your own mind was the way you oriented yourself to reaching out to the voters in this kind of a setting?
Well, to me, it was focusing the campaign on the issues that you knew voters really cared about. And we decided early on that it was going to be all about economy and jobs, given the state of the national and global economy. So we built our whole campaign around jobs because it was the most pressing issue, and we knew there was the most important issue that independent voters cared about, and overwhelmingly independent voters determined the outcome of the election. We knew they went strongly for Obama, and that I needed to be able to get them back to win. So we started early on with an economic message that focused on jobs. In fact, my first bumper sticker was Bob's for Jobs. Now, it happened to ring very nicely for me, but it set the theme of the campaign. And then to couch that jobs economic message in positive, uplifting tones. We figured there was plenty of bad news in newspapers and TVs, and what people wanted was some encouragement that policies that the government would put in place would give them a brighter future and a better tomorrow. And that really was the overall strategy for the campaign.
And one of the things that was interesting was that the Washington Post desperately tried to get you off target. How did you handle that yourself? I mean, here you are for a number of days they're really getting pounded on. And how did you sidestep all that?
We figured the fact that they were going back to a 20-year-old paper, while it was relevant to positions on various life and family and social issues, that we assumed that people were much more interested in their pocketbook issues than something I wrote 20 years ago. Nonetheless, we figured that the press would continue, and my opponent would continue to have a field day. So it really gave me an extraordinary opportunity to say, yeah, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-family, I'm a social conservative, and that's the way I've voted in the past as a legislator, and that's the way I'm going to govern. Now, let's talk about jobs and the economy, which is what people cared about. And we had to really work hard, despite a couple of weeks of just being pounded in some of the mainstream media. We had to just focus on the message discipline of talking about jobs and the economy. And that's hard for a candidate. It's a lot easier for the political consultants who may be a little bit more dispassionate and just have the white papers and the blueprint for the campaign. But when it's your name constantly getting pounded, and most of the articles have things that are negative about you or out of context, it's harder. But I learned that message discipline is so important. If you really know what the voters care about, and you have a good strategy and a good set of policies for carrying that message through, stick with it. stay on it. And if people try to get you on message, acknowledge your position on life, family, marriage, guns, whatever the issues may be, and then as quickly as possible pivot back to what you know is the central theme of the campaign, because that's what voters care about. And we did that, and even though we lost a little bit of steam for about 3 or 4 weeks in the paper, once that ran its course, we rapidly distanced ourselves from our opponent down the stretch, because we were talking almost exclusively about jobs, economic opportunity, energy, transportation, the bread and butter issues people were concerned about.
Well, one of the reasons I was inspired to try to put this together was that there's a lot of feeling that candidates can just capitalize on voter anger this year by being negative and by sort of stoking the anger. But it struck me that you were actually trying to reach the voters in a positive way to focus their anger towards accomplishment. I mean, how would you describe what voters were telling you they wanted?
We thought there was so much bad economic news and so much hyper-partisanship in Washington, and so much rhetoric that they were pretty much tired of it. And what they wanted is not only the focus on the economic issues, but they wanted to hear something a little more lofty and visionary and uplifting about how that we were going to create more jobs and opportunity for them and their kids and their grandkids, so that everybody would have a better shot at the American dream. And we overwhelmingly ran, I think, a positive campaign on ideas, and especially when we could see our opponent talking more in generalities and platitudes and attacking me early and often on social issues. We thought the contrast was a very positive, uplifting message on jobs, energy, taxes, transportation, things like that would give people a better view of what life was going to be like if they elected me as governor. And I heard overwhelmingly that, while we did the appropriate contrast that we thought we needed to do with our opponent on taxes and, frankly, some of the federal policies like cap and trade and card check, and showing the distance between he and I on those issues, most of the rest of the campaign was positive economic message. And I really think in this environment, people want to see that. They want to be inspired and uplifted. They're just tired of just rampant partisanship based on who's going to win. Now, that doesn't mean you capitulate 1 inch on what we believe in as limited government conservative Republicans, but it means phrasing it in a way that can uplift and inspire people to their highest and best, and not just tear people down. And that worked very well for us.
Now, along that line, if you had to summarize, because you had to do it all the time for a year, what was your elevator pitch? What was the core theme? If you could only see a voter once, that you tried to get across to them.
Bob's for jobs. If I figure if that's all people remembered on November 3rd, Election Day, that I was the guy that was going to help create jobs, then I win. I mean, voters at the end of the day, after all the millions that are spent on TV, they may remember this a very core of your message, and that's what I wanted to remember. And so I said, look, the free enterprise system is the best way to deliver economic opportunities for everybody. What the federal government is doing with more taxes and bailouts and regulation and spending is not going to help us. If you elect me, my core focus is going to be on creating more jobs and economic opportunity that's going to give you and your kids a better shot at a brighter future. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to promote small business. We're going to make Virginia the energy capital of the East Coast. We're going to provide more opportunity for kids to get into college at a more affordable tuition rate, so long term they're going to get a better job when they get out of college. We're going to make our roads a little bit better. Here's our specific ideas so that you can get to work a little bit faster. Every issue area that we talked about returned to jobs, economic development. And so I could do it in 5 minutes, or I could do it in a half an hour, depending on the audience. But it all fed back to that central theme. I think that's so important, because if you get too scattered and talk about too many different things, then voters really aren't quite sure when they go to vote what you really stand for. But if you lock it down, or at least have that one central core in this case, and I think it's going to be true in 2010, which is going to be jobs and economic development. Even the president understood that the other night in his State of the Union speech. Then you can wrap virtually every issue around that economic message and win. Here's the key. People know in their personal lives that when the economy's down, they know that they've got to cut spending, that they can't govern themselves the same way, that they've got to make tougher choices. And so when a candidate starts talking about why government needs to do the same thing and spend less and tax less and regulate less, the voters are already there because they're doing it in their personal lives. And that's why I think our message was pretty well received by those independent voters because they could relate to it very well.
When you, one of the things that I thought was most impressive about your message effort was that you really, and particularly in Northern Virginia, penetrated different ethnic groups. There are a lot of different Asian groups here, Koreans, Vietnamese, Salvadorians. There are also significant Latino groups here.
Yes.
How did you, from the very beginning of your campaign, how did you see this whole process of reaching out to groups who historically don't identify with or communicate with Republicans, and what did you do to achieve that?
Well, I guess first, Newt, just looking at the demographics and the long-term projections for the increasing diversity in Virginia and America, I realized that if we conservatives and Republicans don't do a better job with outreach to the minority community and the new Americans, we are going to be a permanent minority fixture in America. Number two, increasingly, especially in Northern Virginia, with the incredibly diverse population up there, that Republicans in the past had sort of been ignoring those voter blocks at their peril, and in a close election, which we originally thought it would be, since we've had so many 52-48 races here the last couple of cycles in Virginia, that a little bit more turnout here and there, or converting a few more folks from the Asian or Hispanic community to my cause could be pivotal in the race. So we started about a year out building coalitions. We identified key leaders in the Chinese, the Filipino, the Hispanic communities, and on down to even the Cambodian and Pakistani communities. And I just started being present. I really felt that this issue of job creation, economic development is one that really transcends nationality or ethnic origin, and that the more that I could reach all those communities on this issue, the better I'd be. No matter how they voted in the past, if I was there early, often talking about these issues, the better. Particularly in the Asian American community, where you have so many small business people and entrepreneurs that are very much in sync with the Republican ideas of free enterprise and limited government, I'd have a good chance. With the African American community and the Hispanic community, I would have a lot more work to do, but if I could just show that I was there, I was concerned about these issues, and I wasn't giving up at all on blocks of votes simply because of historical voting patterns, but I was really interested in solving problems and addressing issues important to them, that I'd get a fair share to the vote. So the key was getting leaders in those various communities to buy in to our message, and then asking them to be leaders and go out and recruit others to our side. And that really worked pretty well. I don't know exactly from the exit polls what the numbers show, but obviously in those precincts where we had heavier minority populations, we did pretty well. And again, winning Fairfax County for the first time in 12 years was a pretty good sign that we'd made a difference. And the other thing we did that was actually a very practical thing that worked well is we translated bumper stickers into about 12 different languages, in Tagalog and into Spanish, into Chinese. We had big banners that had our message in, I support Bob McDonnell, or I'm for McDonnell in those languages. So, for instance, when we went to the Eden Center in Fairfax County, which is the big commercial center for Vietnamese Americans, we had materials and bumper stickers and signs all in Vietnamese, and it just helped me to relate better to members of that community. We got Congressman Gao, for instance, the first Vietnamese American elected Republican congressman, to come and campaign with me, and that really helped to create a bond with the Vietnamese community. And we did very well in that community. So, Newt, I think it's at the end of the day, people want to feel a bond. If they feel that they like it, they're more likely to listen to your message. And so we try to relate on it by being present often, by having the language barriers torn down, by having respected people in that community, like a Congressman Gow, to come with me, and did the same thing in the other communities, and I think it made a difference.
Somebody said to me that they thought you had done more than 40 meetings in the Asian American community and over 100 meetings in the Hispanic community. Does that sort of jive with your general sense of how often over the course of a year you were being scheduled into various meetings and groups?
I probably didn't do that many personally. I might have done half of that number. But we had very well-organized coalition. I had a full-time coalitions director that we hired well over a year out. And we identified really about 30 different coalitions. About 10 of them were based on the ethnic communities, and found those individual leaders in those communities. I may have done 30 or 40 myself at different points of time over that year. But we had ongoing meetings with my coalitions director and leaders in those communities to do outreach with for people that were undecided voters. I showed up at the Filipino American 4th of July events. We had several different rallies with folks in the Hispanic community. Constantly visited the Vietnamese community at the Eden Center, which is their commercial hub, and went to the Korean American Day celebration up in Fairfax County. So I tried to go where there were large natural concentrations of people maybe circulated around a particular culture, and go there with key supporters and leaders who were already on board, who could help speak the language, who could advocate for me. And the old saying is a lot of times life is about determined by who shows up. Well, we showed up a lot, and after a while, people began to trust me a little bit, and we started to see the multiplication of our returns.
Two of the key steps in broadening your appeal and in convincing people you were different were getting Sheila Johnson both to endorse you and to do an ad, and then having Doug Wilder decide to be neutral. Were there any keys to that whole relationship-building process?
I think, again, it was me not just assuming that they were going to be on the other side, Doug Wilder in particular had shown an independent streak in the past, and that Sheila Johnson was first and foremost a very accomplished business person, and was a strong believer in free enterprise. Her entrepreneurial spirit in creating BET is really what made her successful. And I thought, I bet she is not very happy about some of these anti-free enterprise policies coming out of Washington. So I went to see her during the primary while the Democrats were still fighting, and said, listen, this is what I believe about business and free enterprise, and this is why I think you ought to give me a shot. I know you've been on the other side most of your career, but I really think you ought to give me a fair chance. And so we just hit it off personally at the beginning, and I kept calling, and finally she decided after the primary was determined that yes, she was concerned about D.C. policies on business, and yes, I was the best guy in business. And so she was able to make that very courageous leap from her traditional Democratic Party support and make the decision. We had a lot of discussions about how that was going to be tough for her, and that we were going to work as hard as we could to vindicate her courage and her choice. Doug Wilder the same. I started working with Doug probably 3 years ago as Attorney General. Met with him regularly, found projects we could work together while he was mayor of Richmond, and I was the Attorney General, particularly around law enforcement and education issues. We found some common ground. We called him regularly. We asked for his advice, not for his support. And by the time the election started getting closer, we had a very, very good working relationship. So again, I think never assume that just because somebody has a long-term record of supporting a Democrat that there aren't issues more important than political affiliation. Right now, people that are leaders in the business community are really concerned about these over-intrusive federal policies. They're concerned about the move of the Democratic Party to have more taxes, more regulation, more litigation, more unionization, and they're very concerned about it. And I think even a conservative, pro-business Republican making a pitch to even a long-term Democrat on these free enterprise issues has a shot in this environment. So that's the best advice that I could give, is just don't ever write anybody off until they absolutely tell you they're for the other side.
Now, you seem to do very well in picking up additional legislative seats. Did you actively work to try to help across the entire ticket, or what was your sense of your campaign as compared to the local races?
I think it's vitally important that a statewide candidate coordinate very closely with the local candidates. I have a very good personal relationship with the Speaker of the House. I knew he had all 100 seats up, and he felt he had a great group of candidates that he had recruited. And I believe, your predecessor, Tip O'Neill, had a good point when he said all politics is local. And even though I was going to be campaigning on a statewide theme and doing some very specific targeted direct mail and TV that was more region-specific, that when it came down to really mobilizing those grassroots workers to come to the polls and the people that were actually knocking on doors, many of them were going to be working with those local candidates. So the closer that local candidate and I could work together and be seen and be visible and having a overall common theme of economic development and energy and education and taxes and regulation as our themes, the better we're going to be. And that worked very effectively. We probably campaigned with about 35, 40 different individual candidates and ended up picking up six new seats in the House to give us a 60-40 margin. I also knew that it was going to be a lot easier for me to govern if I had a strong majority in the House of Delegates. So it was really a win-win. With my visibility on TV, with the overarching states theme and their ability to really mobilize and get out the vote, get out the volunteers at the precinct level, it was a good team. So I would strongly encourage candidates to do that.
You also use new media, and a lot of campaigns are now using the internet to raise money, send out news, coordinate supporters, promote events. What new technology do you think was particularly effective in your campaign in retrospect?
We decided to allocate a significant part of our campaign budget away from traditional sources of radio and TV and put it into new media. And in part it's because we watched the way the Obama campaign had done that. They devoted about 7% of their total advertising budget to online ads. And we figured that's how they were able to be have such a presence, particularly with young people. I think more and more we see people aren't getting their news from the newspapers or even some of the radio or TV, but they're getting it from online sources, the website pop-ups, the banner ads, and those sorts of things. So we actually spent about 8.5% of our total budget was aimed at new media. We also figured that text messaging was being important, so we actually hired the same vendor that did the Obama campaign in this part of the state, and said, look, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to use them to take our conservative message directly to people via text messaging. And so we had a very simple text message that it was Go Bob, and people just text a particular code to Go Bob, and they were on our text messaging list so that they could stay in contact with us. We used constant Twitter messages once we had a good database of people's phone numbers to tweet on a regular basis. And I think between all of those, we found ways to reach people in every medium that they could. We figured the TV would get us so far, but that segment of the population that relies on the internet or text messaging or Twitter or Facebook, that's how we would reach out. We were very aggressive on Facebook. We started that account about 10 months out. My daughter became our sort of our Facebook coordinator. She was also our youth outreach coordinator to all the college campuses, and we found out that we ended up with I think about 35,000 friends on Facebook, about twice as many as our opponent. And again, that was just one more way not only to get people involved, but do it in a way that they thought was cool, was something they use anyway. And it made, I think, a big difference on the college campuses in getting volunteers and people to help us out.
how much overall? I mean, you did very well with younger voters, much better than Republicans have done in recent years. Beyond the new technology, were there any other particular things you thought were helpful?
We've spent a lot of time on the campuses. When I did about a 22-stop announcement campaign in March of the election year, about 8 months out. And I thought it would be a very good signal if we didn't just do the traditional stops at Republican headquarters, but we did 5 of those stops on college campuses. Virtually all the 5 largest college campuses in Virginia, we did events there with young people. And we started with the college Republicans, obviously, as the base. But, again, using some of that new media, we were able to reach out to other young people that long before my opponents were able to get to them and invited them to come. We even did some of them at 10 o'clock at night. That's a time that you don't normally do a campaign event, but that's the time young people are starting to think about, hey, I got a little extra time. Maybe I can go and shoot over to the campaign announcement between studying for the exam and the pizza at midnight. And I think, again, not writing a group off, not saying, well, we're not going to get young people, but we affirmatively spent time on the college campuses, and I think it's important to have a young person be a full-time college or youth coordinator that's responsible for your high school seniors and your colleges. I happen to have a 24-year-old daughter that was a perfect fit, had just graduated, and so it's a lot easier to have that first contact from another young person as opposed to a political operation. We assumed that just because they voted overwhelmingly for President Obama, that it was a series of things that he did that were unique to him as a person, not that they really bought into the Democratic philosophy. And so if we could use the various new media tools, we could be present on the campuses, and more so, we could say, here's why our ideas are going to land you a better job when you graduate with less debt and create more opportunities. That frankly, that was more important to them than who looked cool on YouTube or whatever they thought about the president a year earlier. The message about jobs was very important for these young people who know that within a year or two that they're going to be faced with a tough job market. So I think it was a combination of message and the media strategy with a on the ground person reaching out to them that made a difference.
One thing that made it interesting to me was that there's a general pattern of believing that young people are particularly disinclined to support anything religious or involving God in the public square, and they've been particularly educated by the modern establishment to resent any kind of intolerance of religious, sacred, or traditional values. Yet there was an enormous effort to make you unacceptable in that sense. How did you talk about issues like that in a way that enabled you to reach out to young people without having in any way, from what I could see, backed off 1 inch on what you believe?
Well, that's a great question. I assume that all the public polls about American spiritual beliefs to be accurate, and that is that about 93% say they believe in God, and most of them believe that to some degree that's a relevant consideration in their daily lives. So for me to state that I was a person of faith and that actually guided my decision making and helped me to be more friendly and positive and to be a bridge builder and so forth, I wasn't at all embarrassed or ashamed to say that. I also think in some measure we had a Democratic governor right before me, Governor Tim Kaine, who had been a missionary and who also spoke about his faith. So I think the problem that we thought that would occur is if people were to demonize me like they do with other Republicans, to create this image somehow that if you're a person of faith and a conservative, you must be part of this stereotypical hardcore religious right that has been demonized by the media as somehow being either intolerant or not caring about people or not being open-minded to emerging trends in society. And so that was what we were most concerned about, is the stereotypes that would be created either by the left or by by the media. And we found the best way to deal with that, particularly with young people, is just be nice. I mean, it wasn't very hard to figure out. Is you just got to be nice. You got to build bridges. You got to invite people in. You have to listen to people. And over time, what happens is even if the other side decides that they want to try to put you in that little box, the more people see you and relate to you, they say, well, geez, that's not what I'm reading about that guy. That's not the guy that I see on TV. That's not the guy that I saw at the hot dog stand, or that's not the person that I heard speak at the event. He seems different than that. He's likable. And I just think at the end of the day, everybody that you're trying to attract, Republican, Democrat, regardless of race or religion or ethnic origin, there's a sort of a common trait or bond that God has imprinted on everybody, and that is the desire to be loved, to be appreciated, to be cared for, and that's what you want to see in your political figures, that you know that they've got some genuine concern about you and your issues. So just being nice, being positive, being upbeat is something that I think we've got to do more. I mean, part of the Democratic strategy is always to try to make us mean-spirited because we don't want to put as much money into health care or social programs, or to say that we're the party of no. We're just interested in obstructing this intellectually stimulating progressive agenda. I mean, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not accurate, but it is effective what the left has done over the last decade in creating that. And the best way to combat that is not shrink one iota from your religious beliefs, but to show that why those beliefs turn you into somebody who's caring and who's positive and who wants to reach out and get your ideas, try to build those bridges. So I felt that it was good to turn that into a positive, and that turned out to be worked pretty well for us, Newt.
So here's a personal one that I'm very curious about, and we talked about briefly one day. You know, every campaign has down days. What sustained you, and how did you give yourself a lift when you either got exhausted or angry or frustrated or just plain worn out?
Well, that's a great question. I'd say first, every candidate, before you decide to run for office, you've got to know why you're doing it. You've got to know what is the good you hope to do when you get elected. And you got to know that you want to run because you want to do things and get results. Not that you want to be somebody, not that you want to have a fancy business card, and not when you want to see your name in the headlines. Because you'll see your name in the headlines one way or the other, just might not be what you want. So you've got to know that you have talked to your most trusted friends and that they tell you, yeah, your motives are right. You're in it to serve the public. I really believe that we Republicans are that way, but I think every candidate needs to have that soul-searching and heart-to-heart with their family and their best friends and advisors, and make sure they're in it for the right reasons, because if you're not, in those tough days when the media's beating up on you, or you didn't raise as much money as you would have hoped, or you might not have performed that well during the debate, or whatever the case may be, you've got to resort back to the fact that you are in this because you have a mission. The mission's public service. The mission is to enact conservative, limited government in the fashion of our founders, and that's what sustains you. If you're not grounded from the beginning, it can be a very rocky and tough campaign. I also have had the blessing of having a wife of 33 years who'd been in politics for 18 with me, and knew the ups and downs, and 5 kids who I talked to at length at the beginning, who all agreed that this was the right thing for me to do, and that they, in fact, themselves would appear in TV commercials, would help me campaign. And so when the tough times came, I was able to withstand it. The other thing I would say is, when you build your campaign team, you obviously have to have good media people, good consultants, great managers, but you also want to surround yourself with people that aren't afraid to tell you the truth all the time. And that, I thought, was very important for me, that no matter whether things were going good or going bad, that I would have a lot of straight shooters that would set me completely straight. The other thing that we did is we had a prayer chain. We had people that were people of faith that just agreed that they might not donate time or money, or may not knock on doors, but they agreed just to pray. And for me as a person of faith, that was very important. So in those down times when we had a spate of bad news from the media, that I knew, look, there are people praying for me, and this ultimately the results of this election are going to be determined by my hard work in part, but also through divine providence. And that gave me a sense of peace and comfort throughout the campaign. So those candidates that are people of faith, I think that don't think that the whole battle during the campaign is solely based on how pretty your brochure looks or how good you look at the last debate. There are many other factors at work, and don't stray from your beliefs.
Well, along that line, you obviously occasion reporters and interviewers who are hostile. What kind of advice do you have for candidates about how to get a message across in media interviews and talk shows?
Never let them see you sweat. Keep smiling. I tell you, during the most rocky days of my campaign, dealing with the thesis and attacks on social issues and everything else, they were expecting that I think that a withering assault would get us to be defensive and maybe mean-spirited or elusive, and we didn't do that at all. I mean, I had great advisors that kept me strong on that message, but also encouraged me to look. This is what you believe in. You're a pro-life, pro-family, pro-gun, pro-property rights, pro-free enterprise person. Those are the things that you believe in. Stick with it, and then talk about jobs and the economy, and do it with a smile. And so, no matter how tough the question is, I would try the best I could, even in those down times, to smile my way through it. And so the people that were watching it on TV, that would see those sound bites, even if the question was withering, they would see you smile through it, and that alone, I think, helped to create a tone for us that no matter how much the other side wanted to put us in this stereotypical box, that we were going to be positive and friendly and results oriented, and I just think it particularly with so much tough news from economic news and foreign policy news that may not be what people want to hear, that if they believe that somebody is really looking out for them and is going to be positive and friendly and try to get results, that they'll elect a Republican, even in a left-leaning district or a left-leaning state. They'll go for a Republican if they believe that person's going to be on their side.
You're now faced with the objective reality of trying to explain the fiscal problems that the whole economy and the growth of government has brought. As you're dealing with it, do you have any kind of set of principles you try to rely on as you think through how to explain to people the kind of fiscal reality that Virginia faces?
There's an innate sense, I think, in most Americans that you can't spend what you don't have. Every small business person understands that when the times get tough, your first strategy cannot be going to ask your customers for a pay raise or a price increase. You have to find ways internally to be able to cut your cost of operations. That's what families do. It's what businesses do. And we try to, throughout the campaign, talking about cutting taxes and regulation and litigation. And now, over the last couple of weeks of beginning to govern, I'm trying to relate to people on that level, the same level that they're at in their personal lives or their business lives, and that is that government must live within its means, that massive new deficit spending that creates $100,000 per household national debt is not a good thing. That's not going to help us be a prosperous and strong nation down the road. I think there's just a sense, and for most Americans, that makes common sense. Secondly, given the fiscal realities most Americans face, they don't want to pay any more in taxes. They expect government to work better. Most people believe that there's always something government can do to be more efficient. There's a sense also that government is either trying to do too much or they're not spending money wisely. So all those sort of those innate senses that people have weigh in our favor and weigh towards the conservative message of limited government and less spending. So I'm faced with a $4 billion budget deficit. There's a number on the left that want to raise taxes. I've already said I'll veto tax increases, so it's already beginning to shape the debate in the legislature that they know that there's no sense in putting a budget together with morphing tax increases, because it's going to be vetoed. So now our discussion is what is the best way in the short run to cut expenses, and number two, what's the best way in the long run to restructure government so it's more effective and we have less bureaucracy. So I feel like we've started to have a little impact on the dialogue for the budget already, but at the end of the day, it's still tough sledding. $4 billion is going to mean cuts in strategic and important areas like healthcare and education, and there will be some short-term pain, and it is very difficult for a governor to make cuts that are going to impact services that people really need. My job is to lessen that and try to way to do things smarter. So what we're cutting is duplication and bureaucracy, replace it with innovation and privatization so that it doesn't affect people.